This was an absolutely amazing interview. I am so excited and feel so blessed to have had these people on my podcast. If you have never heard of the Anatomy of Marriage podcast and you are at all interested in things like what I teach, the relationships, how to have a healthy relationship, and the science-based stuff about how to do this well, you will want to listen to the Anatomy of Marriage podcast. I got to interview Melanie and Seth Studley, the duo that created it. They are married and they have been through shit and they have come out on the other end extremely well. They are in a super healthy place and they like to teach other people how they went from point A to point B. And it was an amazing podcast. They're so easy to talk to. And again, I recommend, if you have never heard of the Anatomy of Marriage podcast, you've never had an opportunity to listen to that, they are on YouTube, they're on Spotify, they're on Apple Music, Apple Podcasts. So I recommend that you seek them out. They, again, are just amazing, amazing people. Enjoy the interview. It's so nice to meet you guys. I've been listening to your podcast for so long, and it's just cool to be talking to you.
Well, you too. Thank you so much for having us on.
Yeah, no problem. I'm excited to talk to you guys, and I wanted to interview you because I've been listening to you guys since before I got married, and I was trying to learn more about relationships, and that's kind of been my thing for a while, is learning more about relationships. Why do they work this way? What does a healthy family look like? How do I build that for myself? Because like many humans, I didn't come from the healthiest family, right? And so I wanted to learn more about that. I ended up getting like my degree in it and all that stuff. But like, especially lately, I've been loving being able to listen to your podcast so frequently. And I love what you guys do every single morning, that you're creating content, because especially with COVID, it has been so hard to be in that environment of like constantly growing and thinking about your relationship. So I just want to thank you guys for creating so much content. It's been really valuable for myself and for my husband, and it's improved our marriage, which I'm sure you guys hear a lot, but it's been really
awesome.
Thank you so much. It's always so good to hear that the show is helping people. Cause I mean, it really is like our baby. We love it to pieces. And so when people are like, it's actually working, it feels like, like we raised a kid. That's like,
I want to thank you for thanking us.
Yeah. Thank you for thanking us.
So the questions that I have for you guys today, I want to interview you about. So I work with women who I consider like intimidating women. So women who have been told by the world that they are too intimidating or too scary, or they want too much, or their expectations are too high in life, right? And I encourage like my clients, like, set your standards high. Look for somebody that is going to meet your desires for what you want in, if you want to have a happy, like, what kind of family do you want to have? What kind of life do you want? Do you want to have kids? Like, don't settle on the things, and also don't date someone you're not attracted to. So I work with people on that kind of thing. And a lot of the women that I work with, I work very kind of attachment based in my coaching style. And so I'm working with a lot of women who have like broken trust and are really trying to figure out, like, how do you trust somebody? How do you know that, like, this relationship is something that is going to be pan out, but how do I know that I am safe in this relationship? And kind of how do you vet a person? So I have some questions along those lines that I want to ask you, just because I value your opinion so much, and you guys have been so valuable to me as I've been kind of learning about relationships and working through all this stuff. So if it's okay with you, I'll go ahead and just jump into it.
Of course. Yeah,
absolutely.
Awesome. So first, I think I want to ask you guys, if you could go back in time to like baby Melanie and Seth, you as individuals, what would you tell yourself about dating, or kind of like, what would you want to teach yourself at that when you were beginning to, not even beginning to date, but just like looking for a life partner, like seriously seeking out someone?
Right. I will say right off the bat, I am one of those ladies you're talking about. Like,
that's what I was going to say.
That's kind of why I wanted to interview you guys, because I know I've been listening to the podcast long enough. I was like, this is 100% Melanie. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I knew right out of the gate. I'm like, and it's going to sound awful, but I was like, I accept that. I don't accept that. I like this. I don't like that. And I didn't do that to Seth necessarily.
With your boyfriends or with me?
Well, I just didn't tell them. Like I didn't tell them I was doing it.
Right.
But I was coworkers with Seth for a year before we even started dating.
Oh,
so
that's
I got to
awesome.
see him. Yeah. I mean, it was awesome because I was dating somebody else. And so I got to see like the good, the bad, the ugly. Like, what does it look like when Seth wakes up at 3 a.m. and we have to open at Starbucks? So I got to see all of those things. So I wasn't like trying to get him before I knew what he was like. So in a way, if I could go back and talk to my younger self, it would be about how to handle the marriage side, not so much the dating side. Cause I think when it came to dating, I was fairly ruthless. Like I was,
which is good.
I agree. I totally agree. Well,
Yeah.
what would you say?
So for myself, that's funny. I was thinking about this question or along the similar lines of questioning just today. As I was driving down the road, I asked myself, what do I regret in my life? And like, well, basically nothing, right? Because it's always been a lesson. But the only thing I wish I would have done differently was done what we're doing now and had this growth mindset and this level of whatever that we have that we've worked really hard for. Started that earlier. You know what I'm saying? Like become, in therapy speak, we talk about differentiation and stuff like that. I was like, I wish I would have discovered what differentiation was earlier and just started working my butt off to accomplish that. But in dating, well, that would have helped me in dating because I wouldn't have looked to like other people, other women to like, oh, well, make me feel this way or fulfill me in that way, and I certainly wouldn't have looked towards Melanie to do that. But when we first started dating, we'd known each other for a minute. And I just one day like made a list of things that I wanted in a wife, and it wasn't like, well, she's got to be a size XYZ and do this and that. It wasn't that, but it was more of a,
it was values based.
It was values based. Yeah, exactly. It was values based. It's like, I grew up with my parents. They're still married, right? So I know that makes a big difference in our outlook on a bunch of different things. I'm not judging people whose parents are divorced or anything like that, but for myself, that's what I prefer. So it's like, okay, she's got to be, her parents at least still have to be together. I would like her to be college educated so we can have some things in common and talk about certain things. What else? I mean, it was
it was like you would prefer someone who was used to eating supper around the table at night, like dinner, I guess, as a family, things like that. Like he had a list and they were all like,
they were just very practical stuff, and so that's what I don't know. That's what I would say dating.
Right. But I would say, again, if I could go back in time and talk to my younger self just about relationships in general, I would say that you have to actually grow up in them. You have to be flexible. Like if one word were like the key word of all relationships, it's flexible. That doesn't mean you're accepting like garbage from your spouse, but you got to be flexible and learn that they're a person and you're a person and all of that jazz. So but that's a really good question. But I was pretty like, I knew what I wanted.
That's good. And that's how we get what we want if we don't know. And I think that's the mistake a lot of people make when they go into dating is, oh, I'll just find someone, like it'll just happen. Because everybody tells you that when you're dating, like, oh, you'll just find somebody, you'll run into them, or like it'll happen in a coffee shop and you'll walk in and he'll make some joke about like, oh, I see that you're getting this coffee, and you'll just go on a date and then you'll fall in love and have 5 kids in Vermont in, like a week. So I think it's good to have those like expectations and standards, setting that up and looking more to like, what does a healthy like family and relationship look like? Like, what do I want ultimately, rather than starting in this place of like, well, if it happens, it happens. And this is just kind of what's going on. So having a goal in that moving forward.
I like the idea of reverse engineering, just that basic process of, okay, what does a family look like? My marriage look like? What kind of career do I want? Like, what kind of car do I want to drive? What kind of everything do I want? And then you identify that, and then you just work backwards into it. So I want an XYZ type of family. Okay, let's start working backwards from that. And that's just a really practical approach to get there.
I have one more thing I want to say. I know I just keep talking, but one of the things I remember when we were dating is my sister came into our work. We worked together.
Your sister?
My sister Carrie came in, and she had at the time like a 1-year-old daughter. And I remember Seth, the girl's name is Faith, my niece. And Seth picked her up and was like talking to her. And this was when we were dating. And I remember being like, well, I guess we're getting married, because that is the best thing I've ever seen. And it was awesome. Like He
Your
wasn't
ovaries,
weird,
your
right.
ovaries exploded.
But you weren't like weird. You weren't like, oh, I don't know what to do with a kid. You weren't
Right.
awkward. And that was one of the things where I'm like, if he can deal with that now in that good of a way, that's a sign to me that he will be a good father.
Absolutely.
He's gonna be a good uncle.
Mhm.
So that was something I would say was like a really like awesome thing when we were dating that happened.
Yeah. So if you're
But we gotta
dating,
stop
well, I
talking.
know,
We
but
just
this is
gotta-
but this is good. If you're dating right now, look for those types of qualities in,
Right.
or if you're not dating, just in your potential date person,
Mhm.
look for those type of qualities that you know that you will prefer if you're married.
Right. When you're married. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this actually perfectly leads into my next question. I don't know how you guys did that, but my next
We're
question was, what are the top traits to look for while dating for the most successful life partnership? So if you're
Right.
looking for someone, what should people look for? What are the green flags?
Mhm.
Right. That's a great question. I would say green flags are, again, I go back to flexibility, but like a growth mindset
Mhm.
is huge. And you can kind of gauge what a growth mindset is if your boyfriend or girlfriend has one or doesn't, based on how they talk about stuff. Like, oh, well, it's just too hard for me. I can't. It will never. And if they have a bunch of really negative self-talk, or they can't get a job because it's X, Y, and Z, and they're just making excuse after excuse after excuse, that is a red flag that they are stuck, right?
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And you do not want a partner that is stuck. It is so hard to unstick people. People don't
Right.
want to be unstuck.
Everybody gets stuck,
Right.
in certain
Mhm.
times, but it's really the overarching thing of, how am I going to get out of this? What is
Right.
my
Yeah.
growth mindset? Is this a glass half full or glass half empty
Right.
kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I would say definite growth mindsets,
I would say
attitude.
Yeah, and that's what I was just gonna say.
Mhm.
Another really great like go ahead green light thing would be how they cope with something that they don't expect. So their attitude during something hard. Again, Seth and I dated for a year while we were working at Starbucks. This was 16 years ago or 17 years ago,
Yeah.
when it was different. Starbucks was different. You had to make everything by hand.
It was way better.
They didn't have smoothies. Like, what the crap? And so it was a totally different environment, and stuff would happen. Like, crap would happen. People would spill hot coffee on themselves, stuff would break, things would flood. And so I got to see his attitude when just all the S hit all the fans.
Right.
And it was always good. Like, even if
Yeah.
stuff was really hard, he never yelled at anybody. He never blamed somebody else. He never, it was always like he's owning his emotion in the moment, and he's actually being productive and helpful
Mhm.
going forward. So I would say, if you're looking for like a good green light signal thing for a partner, it is those qualities. It's like, are you flexible? Can you grow? Do you turn into like a 2-year-old when stuff doesn't go your way? Like,
Yeah.
no thanks.
Yeah.
Let's not do that.
Self-awareness is big. And I'm
Right.
not just trying to say like cliche words. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and have been in the field for like 13 years, right? And I've seen zillions of couples and also zillions of individuals.
That's a technical number. Zillions.
It's actually buzzillions. But a lot of people also, I used to do teen groups a long time ago, and these girls, 14, 15, 16, 17, girls and guys would get these girlfriends or boyfriends, and it would just be a nightmare, but of course they'd be
Right.
in love and all this stuff. I'd be like, bro, are you kidding me? What did she tell you she was not doing
Right.
something for? And I'm like, oh my gosh, please do. But they're
Yeah.
only like tiny teenagers, so it doesn't matter, right? But these types of things are attitudes and outlooks that are going to go into like 20,
Right.
21, 25,
Yeah,
30, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
So first you have to be aware. So a level of self-awareness and self-accountability. Okay.
Mhm.
How do I carry myself regardless if Melanie does or does not do something? And that is going to be so telling.
Mhm.
So first, the number one thing you can do to date an awesome person and have an awesome wife or husband, guess what? Get awesome yourself.
Right. Be
Yes.
awesome.
Yes.
Become
I love
self-aware, become accountable, have extreme ownership on things that you do, be
Right.
accountable for what you do and don't do. I had a
Mhm.
coaching client 2 seconds ago who we were supposed to have a potential coaching client. We were supposed to have a 12 o'clock call, right? And we're on the West Coast, and he got the times mixed up and called me at 1. I was like, oh, we're doing a podcast soon. He was like, this is totally my fault. It's my responsibility. I apologize. Here are the times I can meet next. Let me know what works for you.
Awesome.
So what is that? He made a mistake. Oh, it's no big deal, right?
Right.
Yeah.
He said,
Owned
it's
it.
my fault. I did this. It's a mistake, honest mistake. And then, okay, what can we do to make this meeting happen? Right. And it's just that type of attitude, which a lot of teenagers don't have, but some do, I would say, just in my experience. But yeah, you got to get right yourself first.
I would say too, like something that's really impactful that I wish someone had said to me was like the way you show up. How are you being present? And are you able to be present with someone else well? And that would be something like, can you just sit and have a conversation, or do you have to have your phone, or are you always upset? Like, what is your energy and your presence like? And have you worked on that skill? Because that, especially if you're talking about wanting to get married, and double, especially if you want to have children, good Lord, like you have got to be able to be present, and you've got to be able to be aware of the energy that you bring into a room. Like if you come in and everyone's like, ugh, that's important to take note of and grow and change from.
Right.
But
yeah. Awesome. I love talking to you guys. Always got good things to say. I knew I wouldn't have to do much for this interview too. I was like, they're just gonna talk, and I just need to give them a prompt, and they're just gonna go. I know how I know how they are.
That's our favorite.
No, that's great too. It's like,
great.
okay, it's a real conversation. Yeah,
absolutely. That's awesome. So what leads right into that? I don't know how you guys are doing this, but these all lead right into each other. So what would be your book recommendations for people who are single or engaged, and they are maybe they want to change their energy and they don't have the energy that they want to have, or maybe they want to heal their family stuff. I just got through The Power of Showing Up by Dan Siegel.
Oh, yes.
It was amazing. So of course that book, but what other books might you recommend for people who are wanting to maybe heal their past trauma from family stuff, heal their attachment, and just kind of figure out like, how do I have a healthy relationship and a healthy relationship with myself? Because that's really ultimately what it's about.
Right.
Okay. So one of the number one books, I read this book early on in grad school, and it was amazing. Now, do you remember the name of the book?
Is it The Family Ties That Bind?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, God, that you remembered, because I did.
Yes, I couldn't remember the name.
So it's called The Family Ties That Bind, and I believe that it is. Oh, dang it. I don't remember.
It has an author.
Yeah. I don't remember the author. It's an older book. People might be able to find it on Amazon.
You can. It has little Russian nesting dolls on the front, but it's just called The Family Ties That Bind.
So this book was one of my first forays into like formal studies of family systems, of family of origin, of genograms, of different genealogical things, attachment, birth order. And it just blew my mind. As a family systems therapist, I now understand and look at things very differently and go, oh my goodness, where we come from matters so much. Absolutely. Sometimes that's a good thing and a bad thing, so let's get that straight first. And where we come from also does not determine where you're going. Right.
And
either.
The Family Ties That Bind is really great because it's a short book. Like it's not a hard read. It's written very, it's a very easy to read book, although it is like a therapist book, but it's super easy to read.
Yeah. So that one was great. I recommend Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink
and Leif Babin.
That
is a military.
Really good.
Yeah. That one's like a Navy SEALs there. It's very like manly, but I loved it. Oh my gosh. It's like, very much about owning your own everything, like the choice you make, the attitude you have, the whatever, the systems you put in place or don't put in place. So Extreme Ownership is on the top of my list too.
And so this one is geared for the men. Wild at Heart by John Eldredge. And he's a Christian author, so it has like overtones of Christianity in it and stuff. But what he has to say about being a man and manhood and getting something from your dad as a son, especially, is so important. And I read that book like 4 times, right? And then the other one is Stop Doing That Shit by Gary John Bishop, right?
Yeah.
Can I say that? Can I say?
Oh, okay. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I thought I could. I read the email first. Oh yeah. Okay. So that's fine. But that one is really good because he is just super like, okay, what are you doing?
Right.
Stop that. What are you doing? And then he gives you practical things how to not do that anymore, which is really great.
And the book he mentioned a minute ago, the Wild at Heart one, is for men, but I would suggest that women read it too. It's not a very long read either, but it helps us understand how men think, how they process, what their actual sort of like overarching life desires are. And it helps us. And if you've got sons, it's a great book to read as well. Another book I would recommend that I absolutely love is called I Am Enough by Marissa Peer. And it is all about, she does rapid transformational therapy, and she is a hypnotherapist, which sounds like totally crazy, but she's amazing. She's got a wonderful, like the way that she does things is we can learn about family of origin all day long. We can learn about our own, proclivity to this or that, or we can learn about depression. We can learn about these. But Marissa Peer in I Am Enough is like, here's how you fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the actual, like, stop thinking about it. Stop meditating about how messed up you are. Here's the stuff to do to fix it. So I love
that.
Yeah, her energy in that book is amazing. And she's got great resources all day long everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So there's I Am Enough. And what was the other one I was thinking? I think the book, what's it called? Anything by Dan
Audible
Siegel.
list right now.
Yes.
Anything by Dan Siegel is so good. The Power of Showing Up is amazing. But there was one I was thinking of, The Alter Ego Effect is a really good one.
Mm-hmm.
That I think if you're struggling with like kind of changing your, like, if you want to really change, if you want to be a better mom, if you want to like wake up and be like, I am a better wife, or I am like a kick-a friend, or whatever it is, the Alter Ego Effect is a really good, again, it's a lot like the I Am Enough vibes, where it's like, it just cuts to the quick. It's not about learning more. It's about the tools to get you there. So those are some of the great ones that I've loved.
That's
We could talk
awesome.
like a billion hours about books though. I mean, it's like all we do
Yeah.
is read books.
That's awesome.
Audible.
No, that's
Audible,
good.
baby.
Yeah, Audible. Me
Mhm.
too. Yeah. Reading.
I love
no,
Audible.
that-
Yeah, I know.
Audible books, yeah, because I can clean or I can drive, and like I got through the Dan Siegel book driving for the past
Right.
week. Like it was awesome.
Yeah.
So the next question I have is a little bit more in depth. So for someone who maybe they have a hurt attachment, right? And maybe they did not have parents who were there for them. Maybe their parents dismissed them, or maybe their parents just were not there for them consistently, or even like possibly abusive, right? There's internal work to do, of course, absolutely. But when we're thinking about like, what are the things people can look for to know that maybe somebody else is trustworthy? That's something a lot of times people struggle with when they have a hurt attachment, is how do I know that this person's actually going to show up? And we can never guarantee that. Absolutely. But what are some traits that they can look for maybe in other people? I teach my clients that boundaries kind of act as filters. So putting up a boundary and seeing how someone reacts to having you set that boundary over time, if they decide to maybe they're consistently bringing up this boundary and saying like, well, why would you do that? This is, maybe they're commenting on, maybe this is stupid, or, I don't think that this is fair, that kind of thing. And you can have discussions about things, but it's fairly obvious when somebody definitely does not want to respect a boundary. So what kind of things do you recommend people do to kind of tell the difference between those who maybe have a solid attachment, people who are going to be trustworthy? I guess, like, how do you trust, which is kind of a big question.
Right.
Yeah. Well, trusting sometimes not sometimes, it's easier for folks who have secure attachment, right? They haven't been burned in this way. They haven't been abandoned or betrayed or XYZ, right? So they find it fairly easy. So does that help people who don't have healthy attachments or appropriate attachment? No, it doesn't. So for the people that have anxious or disorganized or detached attachment styles, I would say, and if you're aware of it, first of all, awareness is curative. So you have to be able to understand it. And the Family of Origin book we mentioned is a great tool to help you understand it. So you have to be aware, understand it, and accept it also. Oh my gosh, this is, this sucks. My mom did this. My dad was this. Okay, well, this is here I am. This is where I am. And I don't need to look back. I'm not going that way anyway, but understanding that it does affect my steps moving forward. So with a person who has those attachment styles and has struggles with that, I would say look for people who do what they say they're going to do.
That's
right?
a big one.
And that can be anything from, hey, I'll be home at 10 today. What time are they home? Were they home before 10 or like 10:05? Okay, that's great. Or hey, I'm texting you, traffic sucks, I'm going to be 30 minutes late. Okay, great. Right. And it's really small things like that. It's tiny incremental steps will get us to where we need to go. I like the analogy that, if you get in an airplane and the pilot, say we're flying to New York City, right, from Seattle, because we're on the West Coast, and Seattle to New York, right? Okay, he sets the course, she sets the course, and somewhere over Nebraska, they fall asleep and hit the wheel like that, but only the plane now is on like a 2-degree different trajectory, right? Absolutely. But in 3 hours, guess where we're going to land? In Miami.
Right.
Yeah.
Wait, we're supposed to be in New York. So
Mhm.
tiny little things over time make a big difference. So if this person can start to look for those things and what we look for, we usually find too.
Right.
Right. And this is amazing in like partnership work. This is why men or women keep on going back to the same type of person that just, they date for a year. It's great. It's awesome. Then they break up because somebody cheated and somebody did something stupid. Right. And it happens over and over and over. So what we look for, we usually find. What we focus on expands.
Right.
So let's change that and be very cautiously optimistic and have good boundaries. I love that you say you teach your clients boundaries.
Right.
And that is a huge thing. We get emails all the time. Well, this and this and this. I'm like, well, let's have a conversation around boundaries.
Where your daggum boundaries?
And
Where
oftentimes,
you setting your fences.
Right.
Exactly.
Right,
Yeah. And oftentimes,
let me talk.
I will, but oftentimes I have one more thing. And this was really hard for me to understand when I first heard it, but it's so true. We endure what we allow.
You never start your quotes.
I know.
You always do it.
I have like the best quotes and I sound like Donald Trump. I have the best quotes. No,
I love all quotes. No.
Anyway, I have a lot of quotes, right? But it always takes me a minute to get them right. I have to say them like 3 or 4 times. Like, oh, there it goes. Right. So we endure. We endure what we accept. We endure what we allow in our lives in terms of the boundaries.
Right. So I take a slightly different approach, but it's all, I think, sort of related. When it comes to trust, one of the things that I wish people knew, especially in the early part of a dating relationship, is that you have blinders on. You have a phenylethylamine coursing through your vein. You've got chemicals that are making you go like haywire and you're not seeing straight. Everything is like viewed through rose-colored glasses. Everything is like the glass is full. Everything is wonderful, right? And so what happens in those moments is that we don't even look for the things that are red flags. We don't care. We're like, oh, well, late. Yeah, he was an hour and a half late, but I bet he won't do it next week. I hope. I mean, I love him so much. And like we honestly just set ourselves up for failure by not looking at it through this sort of lens of clarity and logic. So one of the things that I use this analogy that trust is like when you're building a bridge. When you build a bridge, the bridge is not the only thing that goes up. There has to be stuff around that bridge, the support network, scaffolding, like structures that hold it up. And especially in the beginnings of relationships, being around other people who will see if your partner is trustworthy or not is actually hugely beneficial. They will see the things that you don't see. They'll be like, hey, when he said that to you, that wasn't very nice. Are you cool with that? They might be able to show you and reflect back the things that you're missing in order to actually make sure that this person is a good fit or not. And that's just one thing I think around trust is that, especially now, like in this time of the world, people can date and like never even see other people, like never even hang out with their friends. It's COVID, it's all this crap, there's online stuff. And so you're really not building a support network of wisdom and like safety and all of that stuff. So I don't know if that made sense or if it helped, but I know the other thing I was going to say was having a vision. If we have a vision of what we want, and that goes right along with trust, like I knew I wanted Seth to be a trustworthy person. If he proved himself not to be, he was gone. I mean, there was, and that's a boundary that I put in place. Like, and I was very clear, like, if you do X, see you later. Right. And that builds.
Well, we never had a conversation really, but you.
Oh, but you knew.
Well, yeah. I mean, you just know for yourself.
Right. Yeah. And so I think it's important that we at least have conversations like that to ourselves of I'm not going to accept and allow a lack of trust from my partner. Like that's not even something I'm okay with. I'm not going to bend for their stupid lies all the time. Now I'm mad.
Oh, that's good. I love what you guys have to say, especially about this like topic where we're thinking a lot about trusting and how to kind of essentially like you both have this like confidence about, and maybe it is easier to do like once you're in a relationship. And I know that I have quite a bit of confidence in talking about this, and we're all married people here. So there is a certain amount of like, we feel confident about this, but we also feel confident about this because we've done it. And I guess like confidence that each of you have internally, I think that is extremely important, especially when seeking a life partnership, is that you have that internal strength. You can kind of stand on your own, and you are not. So it's something that Dan Siegel said in the book, because I just read it, he was talking about how like parents will teach their children, if you didn't get it, you kind of have to teach it to yourself, that waves come and you can kind of dive into the waves, and some waves are pleasant and nice, and some waves are not very pleasant or nice. And sometimes you'll date somebody and they might betray your trust, and that happens. That's a not fun wave to go through, but you can still handle that. And you know that life is not all bad waves. And I think that that is a huge part of life in general, but dating and relationships, is knowing that not everything always turns out poorly. So like, I know for myself, like growing up, I was under the impression that life just kind of happened to people and people dealt with it. And I mentioned that to my mom once, and she was like, that is so interesting, because that's how I felt raising you, is I kind of felt like life happens and you just kind of like deal with what life gives you. And she like is one of the people who has inspired me to learn more about relationships, because she got to a point in her own life where she was like, this isn't right. There's something not that I don't know. And so she pursued that for herself. And so I've pursued that for myself and gotten, you know, like more from that. And having to kind of like teach yourself, like, or kind of put yourself around people who see that life is not all bad things, and that life is not always waiting for the other shoe to drop or something bad to happen or this series of difficult things. And life has difficult things that happen, and there often are, like, especially if you are allowing those things into your life, I guess. So like we talked about what was the quote that we were
what
like,
you allow, accept, you allow, what you allow, you accept.
Yeah. What you allow, you endure.
What you,
Something
so
like
what
that.
you
Yeah.
allow, no, yeah, what you allow, you endure. So like if you are allowing those things into your life and you have for a long time, then yeah, those things are probably going to happen to you more frequently, because you're not putting up boundaries, you're not setting your fences, and there are wolves getting in, and like that happens. But if you like, it's just about beginning the process of beginning to set those boundaries. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to have these steps back. And maybe you take 4 steps forward and then you take 3 steps back, but you have still moved forward and you've still made progress. And that's a huge part of, I guess, like becoming the person that you want to be and building that life that you want to have with a potential partner. So yeah,
yeah. One of the things that came to mind when you were saying that is that you can't be pitiful and powerful at the same time. That is one of the most helpful things for me to think of and hear, especially with you're saying this idea of like life happens to you and you're waiting for their shoe to drop. That's a very passive way of living. That's a very like, what is the word?
Well, that's like life is happening to you,
yes,
not for you. And that goes back to attitude. It's like the worst things can happen to really good people or what, or, you know, whatnot, all this stuff. And it's about how they respond. We both recently read the book.
The Alter Ego Effect?
No, the Man's Search for Meaning, right? By Viktor Frankl. You know, he was a survivor of the Auschwitz death camp in Nazi Germany.
That's an amazing book.
And it blows. Yeah. Oh my goodness. It just really blows your mind. Right. Yeah. And like he talks about when after you have literally had everything taken away from you, family members, moms, dads, everything. Yeah. The only thing that you have is yourself and hope. And he could determine like when other inmates in the camp began to lose hope, they would literally die in like 28 days.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And it's having hope. So it's about that attitude, that mindset of, you know, I used to say, Seth, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You mean this car crash was for me? What is wrong with you? Right. And sure, it's not a good thing, but what have I learned from that? Right. Like the number one best thing that's ever happened in our marriage, and because this entire podcast is here, is because we Melanie punched me in the eye.
Yeah, we lost our minds. We went crazy, and I gave him a black eye.
Now, you know, when we were going through that, and it took us a long minute. When I say long minute, I mean like 2 years, people, right? So if you haven't listened to our story, go back and listen to it. Not you, I know you have, but for your listeners. And it's not an overnight thing, but had we said, well, F this, we're out, then all of this other stuff wouldn't have happened. And if a counselor said, well, Seth, actually, you know, this is a good thing that you got a black eye from your wife and, you know, all this stuff, mind-blowing things happened, I'd be like, okay, thanks, I'm leaving.
You're the worst
right?
counselor.
But it's just about like a different understanding of it. And that doesn't come easy. That doesn't come quick. Maybe for some people it comes quick, like a near-death experience and stuff like that. You're like, okay, I'm changing everything.
Yeah. Well, the best way that I can think of it is like it's the crux of every superhero movie basically ever.
Like the hero's journey, right?
Yeah, like
that whole story.
Like, Wolverine
I'm a hero.
gets something happens to Wolverine and now he gets like adamantium claws or whatever it is.
Right.
And then like Captain Marvel, she has this whole string of hard things happen and she becomes Carol Danvers.
Carol
Oh
Danvers.
my gosh. I'm not like a nerd. I like Captain Marvel, but but like literally every superhero movie, their superpower is born out of a horrendous tragedy, great loss, adversity over and over again. And that's one of the most powerful things that I remember in the Alter Ego Effect book that the guy talks about, Todd Herman talks about, was this idea of like, we can let that destroy us. We can let our past destroy us, our abuse as a child, our neglect from our parents, our first relationship, maybe your first marriage, maybe, the death of a child. We can let those things grind us into the ground. And yes, then life is just happening to us and everything's hard and you're waiting for it to get harder and it never gets better. Or we lift ourselves up out of the ashes and we dust ourselves off and it's freaking hard and we do it every single day and we get stronger and better and we improve. And then we look for other people who are just like that and we marry them.
Yes.
Right. Like we marry the other superheroes around us.
Right. Yeah.
No,
then you have a superhero
true.
marriage.
Right. Yeah.
No, that's
awesome. Funny. But I also want to like give, because I don't want people to get the wrong mindset of like, okay, yeah, crappy things happen. Just get over it, go through it. No. So I'm reading another Gary John Bishop right now, and it's called Wise as F. And he's talking about loss and grief and things like that, and how we as a culture use those terrible things to just have our life come to a halt. Oh, and guess what? 10 years, 15, 20 years later, we're still at that halt. So he puts a different reframe on grief and loss and really terrible things happening. And I say this to my clients, my coaching clients and my therapy clients, often the only way out is through, right? And it's grief can be seen as a long tunnel. There is a light. I don't see it yet, but if you're going through hell, keep on going.
Right. Yeah. Don't stop in the middle. Yeah.
And that process, that if I can go through that tunnel of grief, then I can come out on the other side a changed person, like not the same person, a different person with a different outlook and mindset and everything. And I'm not discounting the grief, because grief is real, obviously, physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. Grief is real and it is there and it serves a purpose. Like, this is where I'm supposed to be right now. You're not supposed to do anything. You just lost something. Something terrible happened.
Right.
Sit in it. Don't try to deflect it.
Process it.
Don't try to ignore it. Don't numb it out with alcohol or drugs or sex or anything else. Sit in it, and then sit in it tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And eventually you will get out on that other side.
I like that.
So I don't know how that turned into grief and loss, but I do want to honor folks who
have gone
through terrible things like that.
Yeah. Something that Dan Siegel said, he was talking about trauma and how a lot of times trauma is like a dog bite. And if a dog bites you and you try to pull away, it's likely going to cause a lot more damage that's more difficult to fix than if you were to kind of shove your hand down the dog's throat. It sounds very morbid, but it is true. They will release, and it will be a wound that is a little bit easier to heal. And he said that about trauma and about the things that we have gone through. A lot of times we want to quickly pull away from them, and because we just we don't want the pain anymore. But that initial reaction isn't necessarily helpful. What's helpful is kind of approaching it and beginning to, even though it is painful and it is extremely difficult, approaching that with somebody, of course, who like is trained, especially if you have a lot. Like if you have like PTSD and you're really struggling, seeing someone who's a professional to help you through that and help you approach that, because it can be extremely scary and like just terrifying, really. But as long as you're able to do that in a safe way, processing it is going to get you to a place where you can actually operate in the world Because so often we get stuck, like you said, we get stuck in those moments of what has happened to us. And when we decide, and it's a difficult decision, it's in no way easy to decide that I'm just going to work through this massive thing that I never worked through before. And like, that has defined me as a person for the majority of my life. That it's a hard decision. And I don't want to, it is easy for somebody on the other side, myself, like of trauma, and the things that I've been through, to say, well, like, you just kind of have to decide to do it. But that is the fact of that's what you have to do. You kind of do at some point have to decide that you're going to approach things and do everything that you can to begin to heal yourself. And whenever I say that, I feel insensitive, but that's the fact of life. If you don't at one point just decide to do it, it's not going to happen. Nobody's going to do it for you.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the visuals, I don't know why this is what comes into my head, but I use the analogy with grief, because in the last 2 years, we lost several really key people in my life to cancer. And so I just had the experience of grief and loss over and over again in 1 year. And so I remember this feeling like each death that happened had like an assigned amount of tears and emotion to it, that if I actually didn't allow them to happen, it was like they were going to be just like stuck to me. It became this looming thing. And I almost think of like a shadow, like a shadow behind me, or like a big balloon that's full of all these tears that if I don't cry them out, I will carry them everywhere I go. And everywhere I go, they'll be right on, like, checking out at the grocery store, some stupid thing will make me cry because I have not released them when I should release them. And I could carry that balloon full of tears for 45 years or 45 days. And you know what I mean? Like, and it is hard. 45 days is not an accurate timeline.
Yeah. Well, it could be. I was reading last night, and this goes along with the trauma work and CBT, or trauma-focused CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and also the work of Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score. So our body knows. Sometimes our mind thinks we know, right? But our body actually knows. So this ties back into what I was reading last night about the grief process. Imagine it as a tunnel. Okay. Oh, I don't want to cry anymore. I don't want to cry. Well, you're still in the tunnel.
Right.
But the tunnel is saying, the way out, I have the map here. Go cry.
Right.
And when you're done,
crying is on the map.
Right. Crying is on the map. It will get you out and on the other side. Right. And if we don't do that, if we resist, what we resist persists. Right. And then there's been all kinds of studies from The Body Keeps the Score. Okay, when we hold on to stuff like that, and this can be anything, not just grief, but resentment or anger or bitterness or anything like that. Oh, guess what happens? It attaches itself somewhere in the body, and this is getting kind of meta, but this is all like neurobiological research and stuff. So it sounds trippy, but it's not. And there's so many studies around this. Cortisol levels increase, right? Oh, we start just having inexplicable pain, right? I have several clients, and we're trying to work on, okay, they have a pain. They've been to every doctor in the world. Just can't. They don't know, right? But I think I know what's happening. Like, come on, let's process this stuff out. But sometimes if we've been holding on to that for 10, 15, 20 years, it is so monumentally, devastatingly scary and paralyzing, right? So we have fight, flight, or freeze, or just do nothing and continue on this trajectory and then think that it's something else.
Yeah. An analogy that I use with my coaching clients actually is that whatever the trauma is, like, you've already experienced it, it is past, but it's like you're looking down and you see the trauma, and the trauma is a poisonous snake. And what do we do when we see a poisonous snake? Normally we would go the other way. We would run away from it. But with trauma, we're like, I have to do something. And so, but what we end up doing, typically we go down and we grab that snake and we hold on and we hold on, and it just keeps biting us over and over and over, because I don't know why, but it's just something we do when we don't realize we actually need to release it, get away from it, let go of it. And it's going to come back. And, until you've processed it enough and figured out how to, like, what are the steps when you feel this and you're triggered by that? What do you do? And there are steps that you can do, tools that you can acquire, skill sets that you can learn about, and all of those things. But really, it's a process. You've got to go through it. But no amount of not going through it will ever get you through it. No amount of
Nice.
like, I'll do it later, or I don't want to do it now, or crying is too weird. Like no amount of holding it back is ever going to release it. It's always going to just be there like a shadow that you can't get away from. And it's really important, especially if we're talking about relationships. Like these things can tear apart marriages.
Absolutely.
They can tear apart families real quick. Like you can't be a good and helpful and kind and present mother if you have not dealt with your own childhood, the own things that happen to you. So yeah, this work is really, really important to do. So don't shy away from it. You're going to be so thankful on the other side when you're out of the tunnel.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's see. So what is the most common reason
that couples end up talking to you guys? So I guess like what is the most typical issue that you guys see when you are working with couples who are kind of processing things and wanting to improve their relationship?
I think what we get, people reach out to us the most when there is some sort of betrayal, perpetually unresolvable conflict. Now, since we've started coaching, people are reaching out because they want to kind of level up their game, but that's less. But the majority of people are reaching out because they're like, oh my gosh, my husband just confessed to, he's been doing this thing, or my wife just confessed that she had an affair. And so that's the majority of the calls that we receive, the people that reach out.
Just because I know that there are.
So I studied John Gottman in school.
Oh yeah.
Adore. It's the same like Dan
Yes,
Siegel.
yes.
John Gottman.
We've seen
Love,
Gottman speak
love it.
a couple times. Yeah.
You have? I'm insanely
Yes.
jealous. I love him.
Yes.
I studied his stuff in school.
Yeah.
Gottman is the greatest. So this is for the male listeners. I think the last time we saw Gottman, I picked up his newest book. Well, at the time it was his newest book. And what was it? It was The Man's Guide to Women.
Yeah. It's a red book.
And it is really good. So dudes, you should go pick that book up. It was really helpful.
Yeah.
The Man's Guide to Women. And it's obviously from a very highly researched academic perspective, but it's really super readable and awesome.
No, I love that. That is super important. And like bringing the like research into actual like practice and talking to people, and kind of that's something that I really enjoy about you guys' podcast is you make what is some people see as kind of like high level, or some people struggle to translate to their own lives. When you're seeing it in the research, you're seeing it in the like people like John Gottman, people like Dan Siegel, they do a good job of translating that, but you guys do such a good job of taking that into the individual application. And I love when Melanie, you sometimes interrupt Seth and you're like, that is too much. That is too much counseling speak. This is what he's trying to say. Because I always am like, I'm like tracking 100% with Seth. I'm like, yeah, for sure. And then you're like, no, there are people who are not going to understand this. And that's so important to translate it for people who they don't necessarily, maybe they're not super into, like what we're talking about, or, they decided not to maybe study something like this in school, which is understandable. There are tons of interesting things to study. But having things that are that level of accessible, I think is what's going to really improve our culture and communities as a whole. Because really when we are thinking about improving our culture and being more, just kind of creating people who are more secure in their attachment, creating a world that is a little bit more comfortable in that way. It is something that I think people only really know what they were raised with. Most people are not raised with these concepts. So having that given to you in a way that is kind of consumable is really important. And that's what I want to do as well.
I mean, that's my whole goal is I think that I am such a nerd. I love TED Talks. I love books. I love all of the things. I'll go and I'll watch like seminars, and I'm just such a nerd. But I understand that having, liking that stuff is not the same as applying any of it. I mean, I can I can read every Brene Brown book on the planet and still not have any more like ability to cope with my shame or whatever. And so it's, to me, what I think is so amazing, like Dan Siegel needs somebody to take his work and then make it into tools. His work needs, everyone should know his name for one, and they don't, which is sad, but his entire life's work should be like put into tools, into apps, into whatever, because it really is our patterns and our behaviors that change our lives. It's not what we think. It's not what we think. It's about what we implement and how we behave, what we do that changes our lives. And so that is like my mission, just all over the place, especially for marriage, relationships, and parenting is like you said, you just go to what you know. And if we just go to what, if we had like a really crappy childhood, we're just going to perpetuate that same thing unless we have tools, behavioral changes, practical tips, all that stuff just at our fingertips 24 hours a day. And so that is my mission, is like, how do you transforming that stuff into the most practical stuff possible?
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the whole reasons we made the podcast. We create resources that we wish we had when we were going through all that stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And it's fun because we do get to give the therapeutic perspective based on my training and stuff like that. And then the real application of stuff. And Vincent van Gogh has a favorite quote, and I'll get this one right, I promise. He says, we first must experience what we want to express. And obviously he was an artist. This is coming from an artist perspective. But when you do, I really like to listen to people and respect people who have some experience in what they have gone through, right? Absolutely. I'm not going to go get financial advice from a freshman college student who literally knows nothing.
Right.
Absolutely. Or physical training advice from someone who's never been in a gym in their life, right? And I'm not saying we're the best at it, but we do have a minute of experience. Oh, plus we went through it, and we have 3 kids, and we've been married for longer than 6 months. So that's that, right? So and that doesn't mean you have to experience every single thing before we have to express it. We can have an idea, but those who have experience say like, I've had clients in the past or been to trainings in the past on suicidality and how to deal with, suicide ideation or suicidal thoughts in clients. And they themselves, the trainer in the past, have had multiple attempts to end their life because of this or because of that or whatever. And that gives a really, really different perspective on my understanding of how I can further help people. Right. So I don't have to, have to had SI or attempts before. Right. Yeah. But I can learn from people who have, and then apply that to myself or clients or whatnot. So if you don't have to have a good marriage and be like, halfway okay with things, but you can only do that if your wife gave you a black eye, or none of that. Right. We're not saying that, but yeah.
Awesome. I have to go. I've loved talking to you guys. I could talk to you guys for way longer. And I'd love to have you guys back at some point if you'd want to. I'm really looking forward to sharing this with my followers and just kind of being able to open them up to the world of AOM as well, anatomy of marriage, and allowing them to see, because you guys have amazing content that is not just for people who are married. You can learn so much from their podcast. Just if you're single still now, learning so much about dynamics, what to look for in a relationship, and what people have gone through, what are the common things, right, that they're seeing. So have a fantastic day. It was awesome to talk to you guys. Yeah.